Is that us good to go, so Georgia? It says it's streaming to YouTube.
Yeah, we're ready to start.
Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to today's session of IAPS at a distance. So this is Women in Physics 2, and today with us we have Dr. Jessica Wade and Dr. Marie Sakoa. So Dr. Jess Wade is from the Institute of Physics, so the IOP, and Dr. Nakoa is from the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World, OWSD. Thank you so much to both of you for being here with us today. It's really a pleasure to have you here, and I can't wait to hear more about you. So I have Jess, if you want to go first and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself.
I thought I should make my background a bit more representative of where I am. So I had a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm going to put it as a picture of the skyline in London. I'll step back so you can all see it. So I don't actually work for the Institute of Physics. That was a complete mistake. I work for Imperial College London. I am a researcher. I'm a scientific researcher. And my job is looking at new materials for electronic devices. I'm particularly interested in making light emitting materials, so materials we can use in the screens of our mobile phones and televisions, potentially the laptop that you're all tuning in to watch this on. Throughout my career, I've kind of been really committed to equality and diversity, and particularly trying to think about ways we can improve the representation of women and people of color and people with disabilities and LGBTQ+ scientists in physics. And so I think that's why I had the honor of being invited today, and I really look forward to the discussion. Is that enough, chat? Great, awesome.
Perfect. And Reese, would you like to say anything? Introduce yourself, sorry.
Okay, so I'm Maris Kwame from Congo, Brazzaville. Currently, I'm a lecturer in physics, and I also as Jessica said also, I'm not working for the OWSD, but I'm working at the University of Maringrabi, which is in Brazzaville. For the OWSD, it's because I got the fund under the OWSD. That's why they put OWSD in my case. So from my research point of view, I'm using we are producing electricity for rural community using biomass and solar panel. So we are using two sources of energy in order to produce this electricity. That's a little bit what I'm doing currently. But in order to choose those kind of biomass, you need to characterize them. And that's where the IFM come into it, because you need to have a better idea of the biomass you are using. And then we characterize the biomass using the IFM. And yeah, that's a little bit what I'm doing for my research.
Brilliant. So just to double check, did either of you have a presentation to give on this, or
no,
are we just having a discussion?
No.
Perfect.
No.
I just want to double check the notes. Okay, so I have a few questions here, but if any of the participants would like to leave some questions in the chat, we'll definitely get to them too. So number one that I have here, and maybe we can lead to some of our own questions as well in this, is why is it important to talk about women in physics, to highlight and address the underrepresentation of women in STEM and physics in particular, which is, I guess, very broad, and we both have your own experiences in that for sure.
Okay. So Jessica, you go first?
You can go first, feel free, and I'll come
Okay.
back.
Yeah, it's because it's very important to talk about that in order to shape the role of women and what they could be. Because sometimes due to society, we don't really know why we have this problem of underrepresentation. And in order to resolve it, we need to talk about that and to let them know what they could be. And also, as I always say, when we start to talk about the underrepresentation, we could easily pass the message that the lack of diversity in physics, it's not only an issue of inequality, but it affects the physics we could do and the system we created, because does affect really the consequence of how research is conducted and how it will be applied. So in order to avoid this kind of problem, talking about that will lead to another direction or lead to a better idea of what women could be doing if they choose to do physics.
Yeah, I completely echo what Dr. Nkoya said. I completely agree with that. That we have a really big issue in recruiting people from more diverse backgrounds to study physics. So it's not just women, it's also non-white people. It's also people who aren't privileged and quite rich. Usually if you go to a high school that has a physics teacher who's really inspiring and amazing, you're in quite a lucky position to start off with. You know, you're much more likely to study physics if one of your parents studies physics. So we're already narrowing so much the diversity of people who even think about starting studying physics. And then beyond that, the community we've created, the academic community, is particularly hostile to non-Westerners, to non-native English speakers, to non-white people, to non-men, really. And as a result, even if people start off studying physics, they get systematically pushed out. So I think we need to keep talking about these issues and issues of inequality and underrepresentation, because we need to change both sides of it. We need to do a lot on the inspiring and recruitment side, but we also need to kind of transform the physics communities we work in to make sure that they're more welcoming and inclusive.
I definitely agree. And as a woman in physics too, I can say it's been quite an experience so far. Like I was the only girl in my course, and honestly, if I hadn't had such a good physics teacher in secondary school, I don't think I'd have ended up in physics. I really am like one of the lucky ones compared to other people, because when you do talk to people who are doing, say, chemistry or biology, they'll say like, yes, I love science, I love maths, and I really thought I'd love physics. But then you hear the really bad sides of their stories to say they had a teacher who told them they shouldn't be in class because they were a girl, or when they were choosing their options, they were told, oh, no, like, I don't think you should do physics. So yeah, it really is a problem. So I'll move on to the next question that we have, which is sort of similar. And it's, what is the current situation regarding the involvement of women in physics? What is the dimension of the gender imbalance? So how big really is the problem? And I'm sure in 2 different countries as well, and from your experiences, it's been different in both cases.
Sure. Do you want me to start on this one, and then you can take it? So we have, I live and work in the UK. I've always worked in the UK and studied physics here. We have a really interesting education system in the UK, and by interesting I mean completely messed up, in that we make young people make decisions really early. So by the age of 15, you've narrowed the subjects that you're studying at high school down to about 9. By the age of 16, you've narrowed it down to 3. So really, if you haven't decided by the age of 16 that you want to become a physicist or an engineer, you're not going to study the kind of physics and advanced maths that you need to go and do a physics degree later on. And we see this gender imbalance and also imbalance in different ethnicities really, really early. So we see people opting out of physics and advanced math classes at the age of 15 or 16, and not because they don't love physics, not because they've ever really properly interacted with it, but because their teachers don't give them great advice and their parents don't know, right? Because their parents grew up in a time when we really weren't thinking, you know, we didn't have the phenomenal amount and access to physics that we have now. So we see that really, really early. We have about 20 to 25%, so about 1 in 5 of people who study physics for their final year at high school are women. So it's really low numbers then, and about 10% of our physics professors are women. So it starts off at about 20% when they get into university, and then it ends at about 10% when they get to professor level, because every single job wants to recruit women physicists because they're most employable, they're incredible people to work on your team, they're really, really, you know, logical, they've got all this experience working in experiments, they don't put up with any rubbish because they've had it their whole career. So all of these places poach women, and physics as a result loses a lot. So women are underrepresented at professor level, 10%, But when you look at representation of different ethnicities, that's much, much worse. So if you looked at the number of Black physicists in the UK, they make up about 1% of people studying the subject at kind of high school level, end of high school level, and less than 1%, less than 0.5% of physics faculty members. So UK has a big sexism problem in physics, but a much, much bigger racism problem in physics. I can't really smile after that. I'm just going to be like, muted. Unmute.
I was saying, yeah, actually, Jessica has said it all, because we have a big imbalance. I mean, for sure, the problem is from regional point of view, but it's always trending to the same direction. But me, I will point again what Jessica said about the racial point of, from a race point of view, because when women, in particular those from further marginalized background, are not afforded a seat at the table, they cannot correct for the bias that are incorporated into experimental design and downstream application. So we have this problem of trusting that someone from different race could bring something from the table. So these underrepresentation are really well shown. Not only that, so for sure there are women who has success in physics. It's happening, but from the point of view of the demographic inside physics classroom and laboratory have not improved yet, because it's still happening. So it's the imbalance is really showing internationally. Even in Congo, I would say, in Congo, we have 1% of women, 1% women lecturer. And that 1%, it's me as a woman. So you could understand the imbalance, it's just crazy. So this is, but when they start the first year at university, and then they disappear. They disappear. Why? Because we will talk about why later on, but this imbalance, you could understand what I'm talking about. It's happening in UK, as Jessica said, in Congo, but it's a social point of view, cultural point of view, racial point of view, and yeah, regional point of view, let's say.
Yeah, there's definitely a whole lot more problems than just a lack of women in physics. That's something I really hope to tackle this year as the new advocacy and outreach manager here at IAPS. So we have a good question from the chat that could probably follow up, and you might like to go first on this one. So what can a local students' union do for improving the situation for non-males at the faculty? We tried to convince the faculty to hire a specific person for taking on these tasks. However, they said it is bad everywhere, so we can't solve the problem.
So I think it has to be exactly what Dr. Nkoya said, that you lead with not only is improving non-male representation in physics an issue of equity, but it also impacts the science and the research that we do and the success and impact of that research. You know, if you're designing, whether it's the materials that I study or the nanotechnology that Dr. Nkoya studies, if you're doing all of that kind of stuff, you really need diverse minds and ideas to push things beyond where they've been done before. You know, there are so many different disciplines of science that have kind of stagnated because we've had the same people working on them and getting funded for a really, really long time. And I think we really need that innovation and that spark. So I think if people in your department are not going to do it from an equity point of view, which is a little depressing, but fine, then push it from an innovation and impact point of view. Say, look at how much more innovative we could be if we had a more diverse workforce. And there are papers and there's evidence that kind of, you know, you can use to back yourself up. There are lots of universities that have studied the impact, number of citations, big grants they pull in after they make their research teams more diverse. But I would also point light to places that are doing it really well and the impact and the effect that it's had. And you know, I spend a lot of my time editing Wikipedia and writing the Wikipedia pages about women and people of color and scientists particularly. It started as physicists and then I expanded. And when I look for people from diverse backgrounds who have incredible stories, lots of them end up in the States. You know, they're born somewhere like Congo, they're born somewhere like Nigeria, they're born somewhere where they don't have access to the physics research hierarchy that they'd like to be part of. And so they go and set that up elsewhere. And I think that if you look in the, if the person asking this question goes and looks at the programs that countries like America have done to really give opportunity to researchers from underrepresented groups, meaningful opportunity, huge amounts of money, big research labs, that will show you how impactful this kind of program can be and the impact that it has on science and the diversity of your student community. So I would push it from a innovation side, but also a look at what these other great countries are doing and let's learn from them, because America has been doing this for a really long time and they've got lots of it right. I mean, they get a lot wrong too, don't get me wrong on that, but they've got some of it right on this improving diversity of physics researchers.
So the next question, I would say, kind of definitely links onto that. So what are the main obstacles within the scientific community to greater representation of women, or I suppose all groups rather than just women, and particularly in terms of being leading author of papers or achieving places of management in academia or industry?
Yeah, for the obstacle when we are talking about, as Jessica just said, let's just talk about the allocation of research funding. Just like this, for example, we have seen that for sure there are women who are getting funding, but the statistical and study are showing that the women are getting less funding, even though their quality of their proposal are magnificent. But it's always judgmental to say, it has always this septic point of view to accept like from that proposal from women. So they are getting discriminating against the allocation of research funding. And this problem leads that sometimes women, they are allocated to academic service role because they face too much problem of getting, they say, okay, let me go to academic service role. Maybe after I will get recognized, I will get a fund after. And it's good to do this, but often you go unrecognizing because you lost your path, which was from a research point of view, because you are waiting for the big grant. I'm talking from underdeveloping country to point of view. So you lose your path due to obstacle of not getting funding. You have an obstacle also. I will talk about our experience, my experience point of view, cross-cutting barrier like harassment and assault. These happen a lot. So this obstacle, because you don't want to lose yourself, so you just fed up, you just leave it because you don't want to leave this harassment killing you. You also got a problem on the basis of obtaining a position, because that obstacle, because there are not rules, because you have a problem of to accommodate family needs and bias of recruitment. So sometimes this is a big obstacle. You got problem of work expectation, because sometimes as a woman, they have higher expectation of service without compensation. So this is sometimes a big obstacle we face as a woman in physics, but even in science or in general, let's say.
I completely agree. I think that the way we value and award scientists, and particularly the way we think about promotion, is really messed up and really based on old ways that scientists could be evaluated. So at the moment, you're really celebrated if you're someone who goes out and has this big international career where you travel around all different places and work in this lab and then jump over there and then go over there. And that's really difficult for people who might have caring responsibilities, or for people who don't come from backgrounds where they have enough money to be able to support that or access to grants to do it. as was previously mentioned, much more eloquently than I could say, there's a huge problem in bias in scientific research funding. So we know that if men and women, if white names and non-white names submit the same CV or the same paper, they'll get very different responses by job recruiters and publishers and editors. So there's a huge bias in scientific research against non-Westerners, against particular countries, and again, against women. And there's evidence to support this. So we have bias in the allocation of money, bias in the research kind of whole process of publishing the science that you've done. And also exactly what was previously said, women disproportionately take on administrative roles, and those roles aren't ones that are valued particularly in promotion. So they're not ones that when you're going up to become a professor will likely result in you being promoted. And I think that the impact of that all means that women leave really quite early on. They leave in postdoc, they leave in lecturing roles because there are other jobs that want them. And that's a big one. And actually, you know, there's been some research, and it's just so obvious you shouldn't need to do research, but to show that women, when you have nurseries and opportunities for people to have childcare and kind of give out vouchers for childcare and have options for people to freeze their research grants so that they can take time out to look after elderly parents or have children, there's quite a lot of evidence that that means that women stay and you have a much more diverse faculty. And I think we should just do that. You know, why have we not got nurseries or that option for that in all different universities? My mum is a psychiatrist, so is a doctor. And so I grew up in the nursery at the university that she worked in, and so did my brother. And I think I grew up thinking this is kind of normal, but now you see how it's not normal at all. And I think that's something that would really change it.
Yeah, there's so much going on with this. So from your experiences, would you say that there are regional differences in terms of the progress of women in STEM and physics? Which I'm sure there are, but if you want to go into a bit of detail about it.
What was the question? I couldn't hear it.
Sorry. Are there regional differences in terms of the progress of women in STEM and physics?
I guess, but I think that it was already said before that it doesn't matter. It's less about what number you start off with and where you end up. You know, Dr. Nkoye being the only, you know, the 1% women lecturer in the Congo is quite a massive statistic. But if we start, you know, if the UK starts with 20% girls studying physics at high school and ends with 10%, then it's maybe not that. You know, the jump isn't that different. The physics community is an international community, and the values in it that we respect and kind of protect propagate all around the world. So if we keep letting this biased research culture go on, that's biased against pretty much everyone who's not a white man, then we'll have this inequality everywhere. You'll have slightly different numbers, slightly different, very small numbers, but it will manifest everywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I mean, Jessica said it all, because I always say we just leave those statistics, because we need more to focus on how to resolve the thing, because simply because, as always people ask me why, I always say because the reward can be huge. I often get feedback from young people saying that meeting me and hearing about my job made them realize that this subject could be for them too. So for me, I always say this is the most important thing. Like from the starting, when I came back home in Congo in 2017, there were no women even in bachelor. So there were no at all. But now you will see them, because they say, okay, there is Maryse, Dr. Maryse is there. So it's make them, so I'm sure in the next 3 years, we will have another woman for sure. So this is more the focus on what we need to think. For sure, from regional point of view, you have a big difference. From different perspective of science, in physics, you have a big difference. It's a different reality. because like for example in UK you have at least public institution who give some funding for the research. This is like lesson A to for a researcher. But for us, you have to fight to have this funding from the public services. So this is already a first problem. But now, since you are giving innovation, what could be done if you fund the research from a public point of view? So things are changing quite a little bit. So people are more interesting to come from this path of the research. Yeah, this is what I could say.
So someone from the chat has asked if you know of a university or institution that's doing particularly well that they could give as an example or a reference that they could give to their dean team to, I'd say probably to implement better practice or to use as an example of what they should be doing and how they could be better.
There are lots of universities, if you look at the ones that have the best representation of women in physics and engineering programs, again, in America, some in Australia that have done really innovative things. I think we could learn a lot as a scientific community from places like China and South Korea, who have always had quite good representation of women in physics programs early on. So I think if we look at the way that physics is integrated and spoken about in society, it's quite interesting. So if you take a country like South Korea, where tech is the huge thing and being a physicist or an engineer is incredibly respected, parents respect it, kids all want to work for Samsung or LG. I mean, that's a gross exaggeration, but you understand the point. In those kind of places, you have much less gender inequality early on because all young people see it as something that's exciting and inspiring to do. And we've kind of got to this place, I think, in the UK, and it sounds like it in Congo too, where young girls don't hear that it's an exciting and an inspiring thing to do. They don't know that it's something that could be, you know, profitable or a career that would be really inspiring. And so that's why meeting people like Dr. Nkoya and other people is so important for that. I think if you look at universities like MIT and I know that USC, the University of Southern California, have a really good program for making sure that people early on can feel like they're part of the scientific community. So if you look at the way that USC, UCLA, lots of the University of California system engage and interact with minority communities, I think that's a really good place to start. But I would just do some research. I mean, they're probably not going to be ones in the UK because we don't have that good representation. There's a great engineering college in Boston called Olin, OLIN, which is all project-led engineering projects, project-led engineering curriculum. So everything that you learn about engineering, you learn on a project, and they're very societal impact focused. And that has 50-50 men and women. So there are things like that. But I would just, you know, do some research and find them.
That's perfect, thanks. I think once you start looking them up and once you kind of get down that rabbit hole, you will find a lot more and find out really what's going on in different places. I say definitely it is a problem. I'm from Ireland myself, so here too that young people don't really realise or understand a lot of what physics is. And like certainly myself, I barely knew what I was getting myself into when I chose it. In secondary school as an option, and even choosing a university, my parents and family had no idea. They were just hoping I could somewhat explain it and give them an idea what it was and why I thought it was a good thing to do. So we have another question here from the chat asking, how do we handle sexual harassment? So as women in physics, which can be one of the bad things to do in our age, and saying that they've neglected many research projects due to this issue.
How they what?
You're muted, Elora.
Sorry. They asked, how should you handle sexual harassment as a woman in physics? And they said that they've neglected research projects because of this issue.
So I will talk about our example in Congo. At least this is one thing we have, like an institution from a scientific point of view when you could report it directly. They are linked to the police, so this at least is established. So as soon as you have this kind of thing, you could report it, and then they will give, it's like a small trial. They will call the person in order to, so this at least is working for us. So in order to report directly to, but sometimes you could face a problem with someone more like a senior researcher, so very respected person. So it's sometimes difficult to have something to say in front of those kind of people. Me, I always say, you don't need to cut yourself in front of such kind of weak people when they come to harass you. Anyhow, you are always in your free to let people know that these people, don't care if he's a senior researcher, he's harassing me. And this is the point. You don't need to cut it by yourself because I'm afraid they will remove me and so on. No, you need, for us, we report. You could be a research senior or junior, we will report you that this one is harassing X on or Y person. For us, this is how it's working.
There's been quite a lot of research that I would read to kind of understand the prevalence of this issue, particularly in physics. There was a report in Science last year that said 75% of women on undergraduate physics programs in the States had experienced some form of sexual or gender harassment, 3/4 of women, and that was the ones who reported it. So I would take a look at that. The National Science Foundation, and I think it was the NASEM, the Science and Engineering and Medical, all of them together, published a report last year looking at sexual harassment in the sciences, which I think has lots of things that universities can try and do to better strengthen their response to, in these mock trials, as Dr. Nkoy said before. But I think beyond that, in the UK, we have something called the 1752 group, 1752, who are working with government to try and end sexual misconduct in higher education. So particularly staff-student relationships, which are prohibited in some universities and not in other universities. It's very unclear. And also to try and end the use of non-disclosure agreements, which often happens after the kind of incidents that were explained before. Say you take your story somewhere, the universities will try and protect the perpetrator. They'll try and protect the person, particularly if it's a senior man who brings in a lot of research funding, they'll try and get rid of you, the person who's experienced it, rather than get rid of that person. So what the 1752 group are doing, and I would encourage you to look at their website, is to try and better protect students and early career researchers, well, anyone who comes forward, from the use of these non-disclosure agreements, because they can be particularly toxic in getting rid of the good people and keeping the bad people.
Thank you so much to the both of you for such good answers on that. And I'll definitely look up the 1752 and if they have resources, I'll make sure to add them to the IAPS advocacy and make sure they're available for anyone who's wondering about that. So next, how do you think students should get involved in addressing and tackling gender bias in STEM and society in general?
I think students have a huge role to play. I mean, as has been mentioned by both other members of this panel in this discussion, that kind of inspirational first interaction you have with physics is really crucial for you thinking you could work as a physicist. And actually, that's much, much more likely to happen with someone who's quite close to your age. You're much more likely to be excited and inspired and think that you could become that person if they're only, 4 or 5 years older than you. I don't look at wrinkly old professors and think, hey, that's my hero. So I think that you can be that kind of outreach and engagement. You can be that connection that makes it happen. As we've all discussed, that kind of opportunity to get involved and to try difficult and challenging and exciting physics and maths problems and all of that is so crucial for you thinking about it. And I think you can give that opportunity to students. You can think about advocating more for fixed funding to go for people from underrepresented groups. And I think you can work with your university for this. You know, not all the ideas that your university will do will come from the senior leadership. If you went to them and said, we want to set up a scholarship for Black physicists, or we want to set up a scholarship for physicists from the global South, or we want to set up a scholarship for women physicists, and then you go out and look for ways to make it happen, you know, you have this immense opportunity because you're enthusiastic, because you're still super excited about working and studying physics. Go out and get that money and make it happen. That will be really transformative. As Dr. Nkoya said, the huge issue that we have is getting proper scientific funding to the people who want to do research, particularly people who don't look the way that researchers have looked historically. And so if you could give that opportunity, then that's something massive. I think just keep using your voice, because students have such power, and we shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, overall, also, I will just maybe add some small thing. Sometimes you could also organize something like off scientific, in the sense of open lab tour, organize something like that for people underrepresented, so to let them know what is going on in science, to open the door. You could be someone who's opened the door for all, like open tour lab, to let people know what's going on and how people could be open to laboratories. They don't care about your race, your gender. They just want to open to welcome you to their labs. So this is could be added.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great idea about getting people into labs, which is something I haven't seen a lot of here, but I'm sure people, once this whole pandemic situation is over, will definitely be interested in doing if someone actually proposes the idea to them. I'd say with what you said, Jess, about going out as a student to schools and to younger people as a role model. Like, we set up an outreach program at my university a few years ago that I've taken part in, and it's undergrad students who go out to secondary school students and also primary now. And it's definitely had such a bigger impact than when, say, lecturers or holding staff members go out. They feel like they can really relate to us because we were in that position just a few years ago. And it's gone really well. So the next question here is about how does your own organization work to promote women in STEM and physics across the world and across social groups? Is the working group concerned with cultural and racial diversity and the involvement of LGBTQ women and women with disabilities in its effort?
Can you ask the beginning part of that question again? I don't understand it.
Yeah, it was quite a long question, but I had to take a second to read it. So how does your organization work to promote women in STEM and physics across the world and across social groups?
Well, that's a tricky question because we both work for universities and in research. So I don't think that, you know, as much as I love, you know, they share positive things on social media and good stories about women working in science, I don't think they're trying to celebrate women from all social groups across the world. But they do have various programs to try and support women. Like I mentioned, there's a nursery on campus. There are opportunities for you to pause your scientific grant if you have children. There's money available for people to organize events that better understand and promote diversity. We have a really big Black and minority ethnic student network who organize the most sensational events to bring together the community of color at Imperial, where I work. And so we have lots of different ways of forming networks, of having kind of career development opportunities and things like that. So I think there's something in that. I really think, particularly thinking about the stage that we're both at as physics researchers, more support for people from underrepresented groups in writing applications and proposals. So kind of fellowship applications, big grant funding applications, job applications, being conscious of the challenges beyond their scientific research that they may face. So potentially that's, you know, looking after kids or having to look after elderly parents, or during this lockdown, having to, you know, give the technical advice to your grandparents, or whatever the probably women and probably people from marginalized groups have had to do. I think that's a really good one, you know, really strategic, targeted career advice and networking opportunities to people who are underrepresented and you want to increase the representation of.
Yeah, in my case, like we don't, I will not lie, we don't have really like a system for supporting women in STEM officially. But for people like in my case, where you don't have that at the university or at the institution, you need to go out. When I say out, it's not to, even to travel. You need to, now we have internet everywhere for sure, even in Congo. So you need to find some organization. There are many organizations supporting women like me, like women who are not supporting back home. So you need to find those organizations. It's like the OWST, for example, who support really women coming from developing country with mentorship, grant writing training, with networking, PhD fellowship, grants. So you have such kind of organization to help you, even though you are not finding this support back home. So you need to fund, and there are people helping people who need to fund to pursue the career in science, even though back home at the institution when you are working you are not supporting, or at the university you are working you're not supporting. You could find them elsewhere.
There's another question in the chat, which I think is a great follow-up to the last year, which is, isn't the responsibility of being a role model extra work for women and underrepresented groups, which are usually already quite busy due to all the things that we've also talked about?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's lots of people, and again, this is quite well documented, and there's a lot of people who've said this before, that having to go out and do these workshops with young people, or having to constantly be on your best behavior because you know that you're in Dr. Nkoya's case, not only representing all women, but representing all Black women lecturers in Congo, or in a much broader sense. Yeah, there's the responsibility is an extra burden, but I think that people often want to take that on because they're proactive and want to change the community that they're in. I mean, asking us to do this webinar now is something that isn't happening to my male colleagues, right? And it's taking time out of a day that we could otherwise be working and doing our research. And so I think that it's important that we have these discussions, but people should be very conscious about the burdens that they're placing on people's time. And hopefully that happens less and less as we improve the representation more and more.
Do you have anything else to add to that, Dr. Nkoya? Do you have anything to add yourself to that?
No, I'm totally agree with what she said.
Yeah. I think, like, with that said as well, like, we do really, really appreciate both of you taking time out of your day to be involved with this. And I know you're supposed to be so busy as well. Is there anything else you would like to add or bring up as a discussion in this?
I would say that the best thing that people can do is to listen to people from underrepresented groups and to do some homework and read. I mean, there's been a huge, racial uprising all around the world around Black Lives Matter and the police brutality in the States. And as a result, people are having really frank and honest discussions about racism across academia. And there's a huge number of resources there ready for you to go to and read. There's a great website called Shut Down STEM, which was a group of academics who came together for a kind of strike for Black lives, but in academia. And they've put on a whole bunch of resources so that you don't have to waste the time of your friends of color all the time going to them and getting them to educate you. You know, we have a responsibility. Like I'm a woman, they're underrepresented in physics, but actually I have a huge amount of privilege in other ways. I've always worked at a wealthy university, I'm white, and I have a huge responsibility therefore to learn about the experiences of underrepresented groups. So I would say, particularly if there are any white men who are watching, which, you know, given the number of attendees, I doubt there are, I would say go off and read, go off and do some homework and read, and think about what you can do to better support your colleagues who are from underrepresented groups. Because I think that's the biggest thing. You can't constantly go and ask them all the time, what's wrong? Have you ever experienced this? What's sexism? What's sexual harassment? You've got to do the learning yourself, because when you do that, you'll actually be motivated to change things.
Yeah, I will just add also because of the support, because for those women who are still like hesitating to go for it, to say, oh my God, in my case, for example, in Africa, or should I go for it? Or I just want to go outside from Africa. I will say there are tons and tons of opportunity. And sometimes I got too much application. I don't know even how to do all of them because, for example, they just selected for women in sub-Saharan Africa. We are not that much. So you have many opportunities. When you have the potential, you will have too much thing to do. Sometimes I got overwhelming. So even my students, they are like, oh, my, doctor, and sometimes my male colleague, they say, why only her? Because we are not that much. so sometimes I got overwhelming. So I'm saying to some women, they could, I always call it like an adventure to come back in Africa. But I really enjoy each second of it. I really each second of it because I discover myself that in challenging, and I see some of my female students going to this challenge. It's just crazy good. It's a crazy good thing. So this is what I could say for women who are like abroad. They are scared to go back to our continent. They just say that if you are capable to write a grant, if you are capable, you will get funded even you are in Africa. Sometimes they don't have any more solution to grant you. So they should grant you your proposal. Yeah, that's what I want to add.
Thank you so much. So does anyone here in the chat have any more questions? Would you like to ask them now? So I'll just give you a second to see if anyone does. Okay. Oops. Can you see the Q&A chat there? So just stop streaming. So they said, thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed watching the talk and I will try to do my homework, which is brilliant. And yeah, both of you and all the work that you do is really amazing. I know Dr. Wade, I follow you on Twitter. So I've seen a lot of the things that you do. And Dr. Nicoya, if you're on Twitter or anything, I'll make sure to follow you too. And I think really anyone else who's watching this, like you should like check them out and try and find people like this and do your homework and do your research. Because once you start looking, you find out so much more, and it really does open your eyes to the issues that we have at the moment in our community here in Physics. So thank you both so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for introducing us. I'm now Dr. Nicoya's biggest fan, so thank you. For
No, I'm fine for sure.
Bye, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Bye. Thank you so much.